This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Lessons Learned. And interestingly enough, I'm interviewing somebody who I probably haven't seen in, wow, 60 years? No, not quite. 55 years, maybe.
Well, we graduated 53
68.
years ago.
Yeah,
So
that's a long time.
it is.
And some of us even wonder if we'll ever reconnect with the people we knew from before. And the interesting part is, um, we were both in the Minneapolis area at the time, and I left actually 3 months before graduation and
Oh,
graduated
okay.
in Michigan. So I lost track of a lot of people, including Marshall Fine, who is our guest today. And when Marshall and I reconnected on Facebook, one of the things I learned about him is that not only did he too leave the Minneapolis area, um, you were a big time writer in the news media.
I don't know how big time, but yes, I had a full career as a journalist and movie critic. Managed to write a couple books and make a couple of documentaries.
So, going back to high school days, is this something that you thought you were going to pursue, or did it just sort of change along the way?
I always wrote. I wrote for my junior high school paper. I wrote for my high school paper. And yet, when I got out of high school, what I wanted to do was be an actor and put aside a journalism major, which everyone was telling me I should do, excuse me, to be a theater major for my first year. And at the same time, I was writing for the college newspaper, the Minnesota Daily at the University of Minnesota, and making money. And so, but I was still taking these acting classes. I thought, well, writing comes too easy. Acting is a challenge. I really want to do that. But after I had a really good theater teacher my first year as a freshman, who essentially showed me without having to tell me that I had I had what it took as a writer, but not as an actor. And I'd always, I mean, as I was writing, most of the writing I was doing was critical writing for the college paper, writing reviews of
Sure.
concerts and books and records and films and plays, whatever crossed my path, I would sit down and write a review of and submit it. And as I said, I was getting paid. So, and started writing rock and roll reviews for the Minneapolis Star, which was the afternoon paper, during my freshman year of college because there started being a concert scene that there hadn't been before. This is
Right.
1968. And so by the end of that freshman year, I was the only student at the University of Minnesota Journalism School who was writing for the daily paper there and writing for the college paper. And I wasn't even a journalism major. And I finally sort of figured out, okay, maybe being a journalist is the way to go here.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we learn in life is that there may be certain pathways that we think we're going to take. And we start walking down that road, and we get to that fork in the road, and we say, do I stop here? Do I go right? Do I go left? And obviously, you made those choices to sort of shake the tree and go back to what you're really good at. So, when you were writing initially in college, um, did it come easy to you, or was it something that you really had to work at?
Oh, no, it always came way too easy to me to the point that I thought I was much better than I was because it came so easy. I always had, I had an opinion about everything and I thought I knew a lot more than I did. But that's, the confidence of youth. And so, no, I never had, I always thought, I mean, I've never had a writer's block. I've never been stuck for something to write or a way to write it. It just, it's always been there. And on the other hand, it took me probably until, let me think about this, into my almost 50 years old, now into my 40s, when I stopped one day and thought, I'm a writer. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a critic. I'm a writer because In my when I even when I'm not working on journalism, I was still writing. I was writing novels. I was writing plays. I was writing screenplays. Not that anybody ever saw them. I never had much luck with an agent, but I always wrote them thinking, someday I'll get these seen, and then they'll say, "Well, what else do you have?" And I'll have this whole backlog.
How interesting that is, because so many people think, I'm not going to I'm not going to write all this if nobody's going to see it, if I'm not going to get paid for it. And I've heard that a lot recently. And yet, as many of us are becoming, and I hate the word seniors, but as many of us are becoming seniors, we're saying, hey, this is something I've always wanted to do. So now I'm going to try doing it. And the interesting part is it's never too late.
Oh
So,
no, I agree, and
yeah.
certainly writing is a lot less daunting than most people think it is. Uh, as I tell my students, all writing is rewriting. Yes, it's the difficult part is sort of pouring it all out onto the page to get it all out at first. But once you've done that, the hard work is done, and then sort of the enjoyable part comes in because you're rewriting and you're shaping it into what you really wanted it to be. And so I always tell people who want to write, well, just do it, and don't go back and reread what you've written until you're done telling the story you want to tell, because otherwise you get too caught up in rewriting and rethinking and second guessing, and you throw roadblocks in your own way.
Hey, that is very good advice because um, for the last 10 years, I've been writing blogs, and some that I get paid for, some that I don't. But I find that after I get a paragraph or two into it, I do go back and start reading it. And I usually ruin those because, like you said, I've overthought it or I changed my mind. And it's like, wait a second, I should have just finished my path and completed it before I decided that it needed any changes.
Yeah, you need to trust your instincts.
Absolutely. So you graduated college. You were writing for the Minneapolis Star, which are they still in business?
It's now the Star Tribune. They merged, I think, at the end of the 70s.
So at least you still have a real newspaper in Minneapolis. In Cleveland, our plain dealer is more for using as wrapping paper for holidays. Anyways, let's get away from the newspaper, but you did get a good job on the East Coast. So how'd you get out there?
Well, it took me a while to get there. I mean, I graduated college in 1973 and I landed at the Gannett paper in Westchester County in 1987. And in between there, I worked at five or six other newspapers. I was fired from my first three jobs. Somehow had the perspicacity or the wherewithal to just keep going because although the first one was sort of a shocker, I'd been there 6 months and I was fired. It was a complete surprise to me. And I thought, wow, I have devoted all of this time, all of these years to focus on this career. And now I've been fired from my first job. Maybe I've made a big mistake. But thought, no, I knew that I was right, but I also, from the perspective of now looking back then, I was a terrible employee. I thought that, well, I mean, my first job, I was a sports editor. I ran I was the entire sports department.
Okay.
I picked the games to cover. I covered the game. I took pictures at the game. I did interviews afterwards, wrote the story about it, developed the pictures in the dark room and printed them, laid out the pages, wrote the headlines and the captions along with the stories. And it was the greatest training I ever had, but I had no interest in small town sports and kept trying to push the editor of the paper to let me write about entertainment and would do it on my spare time. And they finally said, this really isn't a good fit.
and
So,
it's
but go ahead.
but it's interesting because back in the 70s and 80s, getting fired was totally different than it is today, or at least the attitude about it.
How
Back
so?
then, I think back in the 70s and 80s, we felt almost worthless when we got fired. What did I do? Why don't you like me anymore? Whereas today, um, it's like, hey, it's your loss. and individuals just keep, moving forward. But I know for myself, I've only been fired from one job, and that was 10 years ago when I was in corporate America. And I was 1 year shy of 10 years. And it was all because of age. I knew that, but they couldn't say it. But when I had to walk away, I thought, what's wrong with me? I I was doing it all. And then I had to look back and say it wasn't me. It was the culture of the company. But I don't think we learned that when we were going to school about
No,
culture of the
no.
company.
I mean, getting fired was a stigma, was a
Right.
mark of shame. And certainly that first job, as I said, it was a surprise. The next two, it was like I felt like I'd gotten a raw deal. I was pissed. I was ready to go on and do something, do the next thing in my journalism career, and it was their loss. But I was still angry.
Right.
One, because the first time I was working at a paper in Lawrence, Kansas, had had an interview with a paper in Charlotte, North Carolina, to be their music critic, and then they kept me hanging on for 6 weeks, and I made the mistake of telling my boss, "Yes, I'm looking for this job," because I wanted to be fair to him. But then it got to be 6 weeks, and they're going, "What's going on here?" And finally, they said, "Well, we've found someone to replace you because we know you're going to leave anyways." And the last time I was fired was because I wrote a review that caused a lot of controversy. I was in Jackson, Mississippi, and 3 weeks of letters, pages of letter, full pages of letters to the editor, decrying my review and the fact that the owners of the paper hadn't gotten rid of me. And when they started losing advertising and being vilified from the pulpit of their Baptist church, they finally let me go. Again, I was completely surprised because it was 3 weeks after I'd written the review. I thought the whole thing had blown over. When I got called in, I thought it was all right. It's my 6 month review. I'm going to get a raise. Uh,
Uh,
so
so during all these transitions, were you married and raising a family?
no, thank God, I was still single. But my career hasn't been easy on my wife. Nonetheless, I went from Jackson, Mississippi. I mean, my career is Durango, Colorado, Lawrence, Kansas, Jackson, Mississippi, then Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I was there for 5 years. I was the first Gannett paper that I was with. That's where I met my wife. She's this Yankton girl came to town to work as a city planner. And we moved from there to Rochester, New York, to another Gannett paper. And then from there to Marin County, California, another Gannett paper, and then finally back to Westchester County. And that was all between 1980 and 1987. So she was ready to divorce me there by the end if I'd said, I'm done here. Let's move someplace else. We've been
Yes.
here for 30 plus years. So.
Well, at least you decided to settle down. So that's a good thing. So tell me a little bit about the entertainment writing that you were doing for Gannett, because I know when I finally reconnected, um, you were posting, pictures of people that you were with. So tell me a little bit about entertainment.
Well, I mean, ultimately, when got to New York, it was sort of the job I was looking for. I mean, actually, Marin County, I thought was going to be it because I was told I was going to have carte blanche to cover the Bay Area. And then it turned out, oh, actually, we just want you to cover the entertainment in Marin. And I'd gotten there from Rochester. There was more going on in Rochester than
Right.
in Marin County, but all of this other stuff going on in the Bay Area. So I came to New York to be the movie critic, and all of that entailed. And I was basically sort of given free reign for a long time to know what the news was, know who was available, get the interviews with the people. I mean, I always felt like I was competing with the New York Times, the Daily News, the New York Post in terms of getting interviews with people that maybe they didn't or getting them before they did. But it was a competitive situation. I always felt like I competed well. I was always a pretty competitive person. And so that was the job. And I would interview movie stars basically. And, sometimes as many as, three in a day or, half a dozen in a week. Uh, and you sort of quickly get over the whole idea that they're celebrities who have
Right.
some sort of superpower that you don't.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because My brother has been in the music industry since early 70s. And when he was out in California, and we'd go out to visit him in California, the first thing he'd say is, if you see somebody who you recognize, just shut up. Don't go pointing your finger, don't go getting all excited. And I looked at him and I said, but that's the fun of coming out to Hollywood. And he said, they put on their pants and shoes just like the rest of us. And so when I started doing podcasting full time, I started doing entertainment interviews. And, exactly what he had said. Um, yes, they're in a different industry. Yes, they may be more recognizable, but that doesn't mean that they're any better than any of us. They just have a talent in a certain area, and they've gotten some breaks along the way. And this past year, a lot of them lost a lot of those breaks
Sure,
due to the
absolutely.
pandemic. Yep.
No,
So,
I mean, I always tried to conduct the interviews like they were a conversation.
yep.
That I mean, I always took notes as opposed to using a recorder, and felt like that put us a little bit closer together. Plus the fact that taking notes, I was using my own, use my own shorthand basically, and there's always sort of a lag between when they'd finish talking and when I'd finish writing, which often worked to my advantage in that they would get, sometimes people get uncomfortable with the silence and start talking and maybe say something they hadn't intended to say. So it was kind of an interview technique as well. But it was always more conversational. The idea that, as you said, these people put on their pants one leg at a time.
Right.
They've got kids, they've got obligations, they have, parents, everything. My wife has a saying that I adopted, and I feel like it taught me a little bit of empathy, which is that you never know what secret sorrow another person carries.
Absolutely.
And so it's, you may, and I recognized that when I was interviewing these people, this was a job. That if we made a connection, it wasn't a personal connection, it was a professional connection for a few minutes. But as soon as I walked out the door, they were going to make the connection with the next reporter who walked in.
Exactly.
And, was used to go to junkets where they would have roundtable interviews where you'd be 7 or 8 reporters at a table, and they'd have like 5 tables and 5 celebrities from the movie, and they'd come around and do 15 minutes at each table, and everybody would ask a question and take notes, and then you'd put together a story out of that. I used to hate it because I felt like uh, I was asking good questions and other people weren't, and they were piggybacking on me. But also because too often I was at a table where celebrities sit down and be Tom Hanks, and so say, "Hey, Tom, it's me. Do you remember me, Doug from Syracuse?" And it's, "Oh,
I,
sure, Doug. How are you?" What are they supposed to say?
well, and that brings me to a story that my brother tells often. Um, in his early days out in Hollywood, he worked on a number of Billy Crystal movies. And the only real connection he had, because my brother did sound engineering, was occasionally when, you know, everybody was just like sort of standing around. And one day, my mother had made and sent him chocolate chip cookies. He took them in, and Billy Crystal had one of the chocolate chip cookies. And he said to my brother, "Where did you get these from? I want more." He said, "Well, my mother bakes them." He said, "I want her phone number so I can call her for cookies," which he did. And my mother sent him cookies. But about 5 years later, my brother was walking through O'Hare Airport, and he hears this voice saying, "Joel, Joel, Joel." And he thinks, can't be me. I don't know anybody here. He turns around, and there's Billy Crystal, and they're going in the same door. "Wait up, wait up." And he said they didn't have a real friendship connection. But he said, but it was so interesting that after all those years, he remembered him. And
That's unusual.
yes.
I
And he
was
said, and very much like you, he realizes, and even today when he's recording, these are my friends for today, but they're going to go on someplace else tomorrow. And if they remember me, that's great. I'll probably remember them more than they're going to remember me. Um, so you chose to, I think you chose to retire. Is that correct?
Yes, I stopped writing reviews in 2016. I had just finished making my documentary about Robert Klein and just was tired of it. And so I used to, I had a blog or a website that I had written for almost daily from 2008 to 2016. And I'd started it because I had been the critic at Star Magazine and then was laid off, but kept on a freelance basis. And just was feeling unfulfilled in terms of the fact that I wasn't really doing interviews. I wasn't really writing full reviews, just these little capsule reviews, which paid well enough, but still it was not satisfying to me. And so I spent literally 8 years writing reviews and interviews uh, almost every day. And finally, at that point in 2016, I thought, I'm tired of the sound of my own voice. And then Star laid me off for good. And I thought, well, if nobody's paying me to do this, I don't have to do it anymore. But kept on. I've continued since then. I was hosting and programming a film club at an art house, and have been doing that for 20 years at different venues. And just retired from that a couple weeks ago after 20 years of doing that, 400 movies. And also have been teaching this past year as an adjunct professor in journalism at State University of New York at Purchase, and had my last lecture last week, and it was this huge relief. I feel almost giddy from the lack of responsibility that I have.
So, what do you see yourself doing now?
Um, Honestly, I've spent the last 45 years essentially reading for work. I'd like to read recreationally. When I've been watching movies, it's usually been because it's research or something. There are movies I just want to watch for fun. I'm going to play golf a little more because I was really someone who, even when I wasn't working, was always thinking, what productive use can I make of this time? And it's really a hard mindset to get out of. I've decided that deadlines are addicting, and that after a while, the satisfaction you get from meeting a deadline isn't nearly enough to make up for the amount of resentment and work that went into meeting that deadline. And so, I mean, I've got writing projects that I want to do, but they're on my terms and at my own speed. I'm have a screenplay that I'm trying to produce. I have a director. We're sort of moving slowly. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it'd be like a lot of my other projects that never get off the ground. So, but the point is that there's very little that I have to do, and that feels good.
And since your heart attack, what have you done to change your lifestyle?
Well, it's funny because I said to the doctor who put the stent into my heart, it was the next day. Uh, I said, I'd have told you I was in the best shape of my life. I've been working out every day for the last 5 years. And he says, all evidence to the contrary. Uh, Essentially, what had happened was in 2015, I had a cancer scare, did some research, found that vigorous regular exercise creates antibodies to prevent tumors from starting. And so I become a bit of a gym rat going every day. And after the heart attack, they said, that's probably what saved your life was the fact that you had gotten yourself into good shape. So I've continued to exercise. I was back to going to the gym almost every day, obviously with a scaled back workout, but I went through cardiac rehab where they taught you how to exercise and that gets your
Sure.
heart rate up to a dangerous level, but still strong enough to get you to be a bit of benefit. So since the pandemic, I own a treadmill and I walk on that for about 30 minutes every day to work up a good sweat. And
Well,
I cut back on meat, cut back on salt, sugar, that kind of stuff. Some days more effectively than others.
so you've learned a lot of lessons in this life. And one of the
Yes.
biggest lessons is that now you can do things that you want to do, not that you have to do.
Oh, like I said, I'm feeling sort of like a weight has been lifted. And yeah, it's like I've put aside those thoughts that, you need to make productive use of this time. It's like I still sort of plot out my days in terms of the things I want to do, but if they don't happen, they don't happen. And it's really about just sort of getting off that treadmill and letting yourself relax. And having
Absolutely.
the heart attack was actually really good practice for that in terms of I had 2 months where I just literally had to sit still, which was not who I was, but I slowly came to embrace, I love a good nap now and then. In fact, it's like I don't, I don't resist when slumber beckons, even if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And that's not a bad way to be. I wish I could be that way. Uh, my husband's that way, but I start getting guilty. I see all these things that I want to do. Okay, not even the things that I have to do, and so if I doze off, I sort of wake myself up and say, okay, enough of this. We got to get doing what we want to do. But if
Well, yeah, it's funny because before this past year, uh, I would have told you that I wasn't ready to retire, and in fact was struggling with the idea of not working, not being productive. And then I took on this teaching job, which is, I haven't had to go to campus. I've been teaching from home,
right,
but I would tell you that I was teaching a history of journalism class, and I would tell you I did more academic work to teach that class than I ever did in 5 years of undergraduate work. When I was in college, class was the last place I wanted to be. There were stories to write and reviews to write and money to be made and girls to chase, records to listen to. Uh, and this past year, I was literally writing a lecture, 6,000 word lecture every week. And the spring semester was doing 2 of them a week. I even did a word count, my history class. After the first 9 lectures, I'd written 54,000 words, which is like almost a book. It's more words than are in The Great Gatsby. Um, and so I felt like, boy, this has really cured me of the urge to work because I've been on this assembly line writing these lectures. Like Saturday, okay, I got to do the research. Sunday, got to write the outline. Monday, I got to write my first draft of the first half of it. And it's Thursday,
a lot of
okay, I'm
work.
done for 24 hours. And then I got to start all over again. And it's like no more commitments like that.
So is your wife retired at the same time now?
She will be retired in about 6 weeks.
So
She's excuse me. She helped start a not-for-profit that has turned into a CDFI, a community development finance institution. Um, she started it when my older son was 2 years old, and he just turned 34. So she's been running it all of this
very
time, has grown
young.
it from her being a part-time employee to now having 9 employees and a multi-million-dollar budget. They've been incredibly busy with all of the PPP loans. They're like one of the outlets for that, and so they've been swamped for the entire pandemic.
Sure.
But yeah, 6 weeks, June 30th, she's calling it quits.
Well, that he'll have a lot to celebrate on 4th of July. That's
Oh,
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. And you have a son and you also have a daughter,
No, I
correct?
have 2 sons.
2 sons.
One
Okay.
is 34 and lives in Chicago, and the other is about to turn 30 and lives in Queens.
Well, you have one sort of close by and one who can hop on a plane and come visit. So
Yeah,
that
and
is absolutely wonderful.
he's the one that we think will give us grandchildren first, so we may wind up living closer to him.
Well, if you go closer to Chicago, I have an older son living in Chicago. I don't think I will see grandchildren from him. He is a workaholic, and that's okay. He's happy. And I'll tell you, after this past year, anybody who can say that they're happy doing what they love to do and has survived COVID, I think it's a blessing.
Oh,
And
I mean, I feel very fortunate. My wife is and I have constantly kept each other amused, entertained, centered, not depressed. that it would have been really tough to be stuck indoors with someone you don't like.
And I happen to know somebody who I love very dearly on the West Coast who's in that situation. Um, and just like you, my husband and I have, uh, we made arrangements that, hey, if you're having a rough day and I can't help you or he can't help me, just go to separate places in the house, do what makes you feel good, and then, come on back. And
Hmm.
we have survived it and looking forward to um, being able to travel again. So
Absolutely.
that's on our list. Well, I want to thank you for joining us because, again, I know when I was in high school, what my dream was to go into broadcasting. And when I moved from Michigan, from Minnesota to Michigan, and got into college, I didn't tell my parents that I wasn't going for a teaching degree. And when they found out that my degree was separated into associates and bachelors, and I invited them to come up for graduation for my associates, they pulled me out of college. Um, Looking back, I can understand. Back in the early 70s, there weren't not many women in broadcasting,
Hmm.
and they thought that that was going to be a big mistake. Um, I went back to school, got my degree, and the last couple weeks of my mother's life, I was living with her, and I kept saying, "Excuse me, I got to go in the other room. I'm doing a podcast." And she finally said, "Are you a famous person on the radio?" I said, "I am absolutely famous. Don't you agree?" And she said, "You must be." And that was the blessing for me that I'm finally doing what I've always wanted to do. So again, thank you for sharing your story and some of the lessons you've learned. And for anybody who's looking at this, Marshall is wearing a Cleveland T-shirt for the Cleveland Monsters, our um, hockey team. So thank you for wearing that today. I
And I
appreciate
thought
it.
I better represent. Yeah.
Uh, we appreciate it. Have a great day. Stay well and enjoy retirement.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.